Started, yeah.
Sure.
So good afternoon or evening, folks. My name is Jeff Schuler. I'm the president of Usability Sciences. I know you might have been expecting Adrian Guillory to be moderating the panel today. Unfortunately, Adrian got herself double booked, so you are stuck with me. My apologies. We do have three grizzled veterans of the UX discipline to join us today on panel, all of which are former employees of Usability Sciences and now have wandered off to do wonderful things in other businesses, and they'll be introducing themselves shortly. As Scott said, please use the chat. We encourage questions. We'll try to field the questions as we go along. Some will wait till the end, and Kincaid will be the moderator, if you will, of the questions coming from the audience. So with that said, I'm going to turn it over to Scott and let him do some of his intro. Kincaid?
Well, Jeff, you want to do the who is Usability Sciences?
Oh, yeah, that's right. That's right. I have to do the commercial. So Usability Sciences, this is us. We are a user research firm, user experience research firm, 32 years in the business. We do about 100 projects per year with 20 dedicated researchers. One of the things that sets us apart as a business is an in-house recruiting team. So we do not go outside except for rare recruits to participate in research. We do have a full spectrum of research. We do both qual and quant. Primarily qual, but we're quite capable of doing quantitative research, multicultural, specifically in the Hispanic culture. We're getting more and more into that and are interested in expanding that. We do a lot of international, not so much since the pandemic, but that'll be coming back. And then kind of cradle to grave, if you will, from the inception or the conception of an idea, get to know your customers, define, ideate, and explore as you get into discussing requirements for a new product. And then as you build it out, we can help with the testing and the iterative improvements. So that's our I'm required to do. Now, Mr. Kincaid.
Perfect. And Jeff, just so you know, Paige sent me a horrible note. I think you did a really good job saying that what the company does. So I will not say what she said out loud. That was said in confidence. Obviously, I appreciate everybody joining us today. I am fortunately, I'm going to just say you're probably going to hear old jokes that we've been talking about forever because the company has been around for, as Jeff said, 30 plus years, and you are talking to somewhat of the grizzled veterans today. So as we were riffing with Adrian on different topics that we could present here, you know, a month ago, Jeff and Janice James and Mary Beth Redkert did Before UX Had a Name. And I'm still just amazed that Jeff was able to open a company in the late 80s and had people that actually would pay for research. It's nuts. So a month ago, the conversation was like, let's get into what was the environment like back then. And what we opted for this conversation is to go a little bit farther ahead in the chronological order to talk about the different eras of technology. And while I would love to say we're going to do these in chronological order, I am confident we will not do these in chronological order, but just some of the steps along the way that we're expecting to get into. One of them would be the dawn of a GUI, like a graphical user interface. There was a time where research was only a command line prompt, and then Windows came along. So we'll talk a little bit about that window. And then probably around 1995 era, that's when the web really kicked in. And we'll talk about some of the paradigm things that we saw through that window. Then the museum collection will keep on going to talk about the dawn of cloud, when really folks started to embrace being able to run a business from the cloud. And then we'll get into the dawn of mobile at the beginning of 2000-ish. That's loosely where we're going to go. As we said before, please feel free to use the text chat windows as we're going to Judy's point already on here. It is nuts to think how companies functioned before email, before desktop sharing, and those are certainly some of the things that we're going to be talking about. But ultimately, the spin that we want to have for this conversation is to be able to talk about the bookend conversations of research. Like, how did research happen back in the 90s and 2000s, and be able to talk about how it is today, and just being able to show the bookend experiences. And as I look at the list of folks on the call, there's a lot of folks that have been in these trenches for a while. So if anybody else has anecdotal notes, please plug them into the chat window as well. This is trying to be as much of a group conversation as possible, but we'll have to moderate the mute button. That said, let's do some introductions of who is joining us on this call. So Michelle, we're going to start with you. Tell us a little bit about you, where you're at, and answer some of these questions for us.
All right. Well, thanks, Scott. So my name's Michelle Peterson. I'm currently a senior UX researcher and UX manager at Indeed. Let's see. You asked me to talk about how I got to Usability Sciences. That was in 2003 was when I joined Usability Sciences, and I had heard about you guys at a conference. So I went to a professional conference and learned that you existed. And when I saw that you were hiring, I put in my resume, and that's all she wrote. Thankfully, you guys hired me. It was a great time of my life. It was pretty early in my career, though. You also asked me to talk about how I learned research. So I started off as a scientist. I did scientific research in cognitive neuroscience. I was an academic and a nerd. But when I started my first job in what became called user experience, I was hired at Microsoft as a usability engineer. That's what we used to call ourselves. And that was a different beast. I brought my research background and my knowledge of how people think. That's what cognition is. But it was a lot of on-the-job training of the differences between scientific research and user research. So I learned a lot there. Then when I joined Usability Sciences, I learned from the best, Scott. I learned so much from you and from Jeff and others there. It was just a great place for me to be early in my career. Did I hit on everything you wanted?
Yeah, well, mostly, and we'll probably get into this later on, but what most people probably can't appreciate is when Michelle came on, we basically hired a Wikipedia of a lot of background information of things that we were just sort of making up and beforehand, and she walked in with a ton of just terms and the background and references. So it was very helpful to say the least. Somebody requested that if we're not presenting to make sure to hit the mute. So Paige and Jeff, I've muted you. So as we go through here, please make sure to unmute whenever you got something to say. Let's go with Paige. What's your story?
We can't unmute ourselves, Scott.
Yeah, sorry, we couldn't unmute ourselves, but that's okay. You unmuted me. My name is Paige Valentine. I'm currently the design talent manager at ExxonMobil. I got started at Usability Sciences back in 1996. I was there from 96 to 98. I believe I was hired because Jeff told Scott he was looking for someone with a music degree. And Scott said, you know what? I went to high school with someone who had a music degree. And so you called me and I came over as soon as I could. And I got bit by the bug. I learned research on the streets, right? Like I didn't have any of the fancy methods and everything. We all kind of learned together. I know Scott, as you mentioned, Michelle, was just a huge help. Everyone was. After I left, I moved into information architecture and ultimately into design, although I wouldn't say I'm a visual designer, and interaction design, and got into scientific technical applications, which I really enjoy solving problems for engineers, which is different than what some people do, but I really enjoy it. But yeah, I learned on the streets. That's how I got into it. So with the help of my friends.
Perfect. Thank you, Paige. I think I'm next in the chronological order of who started working at Usability Sciences. So I started as an intern at Usability Sciences in January 2nd of 1992. And by my math, that is over 10 years ago. And I didn't know what I was doing. And what I'd love to say to anybody that will listen, back then, there were no classes. There was no Wikipedia. There were no anything. I think that the office had one book of usability by Jacob Nielsen. It sat on the bookshelf over there, and we would read through it. But for the most part, Jeff kept on throwing us into projects, and like as just on saying, like, what's the root that we're trying to learn? And we just got really good at figuring out how to ask, what's the problem that you're trying to solve? So stay tuned. We'll talk to that more. And then, yeah, look, Jeff, what's your story? Let me unmute you, and then you're going to have to maybe unmute again.
Yeah, I can.
This is.
So you're hearing me now? So I got introduced to usability at the IBM company back in 1987, I guess, and got the idea to open this business in '88, and saw my way clear to do it. Scott mentioned that I got customers to pay for research in the late '80s. Well, I can tell you there weren't a lot of them paying for research in the late '80s. That was really a challenge. I was running around talking about usability, and people's eyes would glaze over. They had no idea what it was. And when I describe it, they say, it's like a focus group. But we learned as we went. It was on the job training. And as Scott said, the name of the game was, what's the problem you're trying to solve? Right? Where are you? And we put everything through usability testing. And the good thing about usability testing is the process never fails. So that's how we built the business. That's how I got introduced to it. For me, it was all on the job training and the lumps that come with that.
Perfect. One of the other things I want to ask Paige and Michelle about is, where are you at now these days? Any chance you happen to be hiring? So like, let's do that loop. I'll start. Hi, but my name's Scott. I work at a company called Salesforce.com. I happen to be one of the research managers on the team. So if anybody is curious about what it would be like to work at Salesforce, please find me on LinkedIn, and we can have a conversation, and we'll start with the conversation. And Paige, how about you? What's your story? Can you unmute on your own, or you still have to? Oh, I hate this. All right.
Yeah, I mean, I'm always looking to connect with people. Please do find me on LinkedIn. I'd love to chat with you. We're in oil and gas right now, and as you know, like, that industry is suffering a little bit right now, but I'm always trying to build my network. So please do connect with me so that we can stay in touch. One of my roles as a design talent manager is recruiting and retention and upskilling. So always willing to make a new friend.
And likewise, I work at Indeed, and we help people get jobs. And one of the jobs we want to help people get is as a UX researcher on our team here, looking at employers. We work with employers, enterprise-sized employers. So if you want to come and understand employers and how hard it is to recruit and retain talent at a large company, feel free to hit me up on LinkedIn. We'd love to have you join our team.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you to you both. I was going to ask if anybody is in attendance, has worked at Usability Sciences, is working at Usability Sciences, please throw it into the chat window. It's good. And I see a guy named Lonnie Shambi is on here. I can't believe that guy is still, like, he was one of the first silent partners of this company. So he has been such a fan of Jeff the whole way through. So awesome. All right. So here's where I'd like to sort of pivot next, is talk about different points of paradigm changes. And I think what's great about Usability Sciences and our world of research, we generally are sitting on the comfy couch right at the cutting edge of technology, being able to see what's next. And so I had never heard of the word paradigm until Jeff told me. He's like, yeah, that's a paradigm change. I was like, what's that mean? And so what I hope for us to talk about is what are those favorite moments that we've seen where it was like the participants just were floored by what we were showing, because it didn't exist in their world until they walked into the RAB space. So Michelle Peterson, what's your story of favorite paradigm observations?
I really think that I don't want to steal yours because yours is a really good one, but we worked on that project together.
That's yours.
Go ahead
Do
and
it.
go ahead and tell that story. That's a really good story about before there were really DVRs. Like, TiVo existed, but there wasn't a lot of market penetration yet. So like not a lot of people had this concept of being able to like pause live TV or record things digitally. And just having folks in the lab looking at a TiVo like product and having them like just watching their minds be blown, like I can pause this broadcast, like that was super fun, right? That was a really fun type of project. We had kind of a similar experience with some of the things that you could do with mobile devices in the early days of mobile. That's kind of really when I started, kind of cutting my teeth in UX. Mobile was brand new, and that was just watching people like, like just seeing their minds being blown with like, oh, there's an app for that. Before there was an app for that was a phrase.
Yeah, exactly, Michelle. And we talked about that DVR. What was interesting is Michelle and I having to brainstorm about how to word a task about pushing the pause button because it was that concept that just did not exist. And we finally landed on you're watching TV, the phone rings, you want to go talk to the on the phone and come back to exactly where you were. And everybody in the mental mind at the time, the only way to do that was to put in a VCR tape, hit record, wait for the show to finish, and then rewind to wherever you were. And so we almost 9 out of 10 sessions, we had to say, push the pause button. And the person looked at me, they looked at like, you're an idiot. That can't possibly. And it paused. And they're like, this is F-bomb. This is amazing that this exists. And so Michelle and I got to do this project in Australia. And the client, believe it or not, wanted us to do the same research in Austria and then Amsterdam and somewhere else. And so we did the same session in German, in Dutch, and it was always a pausen, like it was fantastic just to see those same pieces. So that's again some of the examples here. Paige, what's your story for paradigm change?
I think I'm gonna go with the. I guess it was like '97. I worked on a large multi-city tour for online grocery shopping. Now this was in 1997, and so that was my first exposure to personas too, right? Like essentially, if you're in Boston, then your target audience for that service would be students who don't have a car and they don't have a lot of money. And then in like a large city, it would be like a stay-at-home mom who can't get out but has a lot of money, So that was paid for by a large consumer goods company because they had a vested interest in making it successful. And look, it took like decades until it finally took off, but I was very I was very impressed by that foresight of seeing that was the way that we're going for. But like the task that we had to create for that was like find green beans, and we're like canned green beans, fresh green, like I don't know, like what, like they because their mental model, like they were walking down aisle. It's amazing to watch things grow from nothing to now.
Perfect. Paige, your audio dropped off for a little bit, but I think we got 98.2% of that, so we're good. And to Paige's point, like I'll say, Procter and Gamble paid a lot of the bills for Usability Sciences for a long time, and that was an account that Jeff managed to just keep on feeding with a lot of information over time. So kudos to P&G. They did a lot for our little company at the time. Any other paradigm, or I guess we can keep on going. We'll come back to this topic. Jeff, how about you for paradigm change?
I think the shift from a UX research standpoint from purely software, and that's what we did from 1990 to 1995. We did Windows software products, Word, processors, spreadsheets, presentation graphics, just about anything you can name, right? But then the internet happened, and I enjoy telling the story. I was out at Oracle, doing some stuff out at Oracle, and they were a nice customer for us. And a guy reached out to me and said, I'd like to meet with you. I want to do usability testing on the Oracle store. So I sat down with the guy, and he said, I want to test the Oracle store for usability. I said, okay, what's the Oracle store? And he said, well, that's our store on the World Wide Web. I said, okay, what's the World Wide Web? He said, well, that's the graphical area of the internet. Okay, well, I guess we can do that. But that was my introduction to it. What happened from a research standpoint, when we were testing Windows software, we used to test 4 participants. That was it. And that's all we needed, because the customer was interested in a core set of functionality, and they needed to get usability feedback on that core set of functionality. And so once you ran through 4 people, believe it or not, you had pretty much everything you needed. Then the web happened, and now you've got websites, and now you've got a much more diverse audience with all kinds of things available to them through these websites. And so we had to expand the audience, number one. We went to 10 participants to give the customer a real feel for what they needed to learn. The other thing from a research firm standpoint, we didn't have to install software anymore. It was wonderful. Just send me to a URL, and look, that rascal's already installed. It's ready to go. Now all we have to do is prepare the research plan, and we're off and running. So the introduction, the spread of the web was huge. The other thing that I would comment here is there was a dot-com bubble, and there was a dot-com bust. And you remember that. I mean, 98, 99, literally, we'd have people phoning us up from these dot-coms, and I'm not kidding. They would say, I need to buy some of this usability stuff. How much does it cost? And we would tell them, and they'd say, great. You know, now what is it? I mean, it was absolutely staggering. Then in 2001, when a lot of the crazy business models that these people were putting forth fell on their face, the dot-com bubble burst, and bringing with those kinds of calls. So internet was a big shift for us from a research perspective.
Yeah, and just to add to what Jeff is saying, like, previous to that in Windows, like, it was all structured. The pull down menus looked the same, and so that the content of the bucket changed, but the bucket itself was basically the same. And I remember testing an early marketing website, and they said, we want to be different, so we're going to have the navigation on the bottom. It's going to be brilliant. And this will surprise you. Nobody wanted navigation at the bottom. And so to Jeff's point about some of the dot-coms, and Paige and I, one of our other favorite stories was this product came in with basically Google for your hard drive. And it was an interesting idea because all of your documents were on your hard drive. And 6 users in, the CEO looked at me and said, basically still critiquing how I'm running the research sessions. And she's like, you still don't understand what my product is doing. And she was very upset about how I was moderating. And I was like, well, don't confuse selling with installing. Don't confuse their reaction to your product. They are very confused. And the fact is, I'm still confused with what your product is. You should be concerned because I'm a professional at understanding software, and I don't know what you're trying to solve. It was a bizarre time, to say the least. As far as paradigm changes, the other one for me personally is, I work at Salesforce. Because of Jeff doing that project at Oracle, there was a VP of sales at Oracle, a guy named Mark Benioff, and he said, we should do this research. And so he called Jeff, and so I'm happy to say I was involved in doing some of the first rounds of research for Salesforce. And it was crazy for companies to think of you're asking me to put all of my company information in the cloud. And because right now all the information is in the server in the closet over there, and I don't trust your cloud. I trust my closet. And it's just amazing to see how people over time change their trust to be this nebulous cloud wherever this is. And like it was truly a paradigm change for an admin of Salesforce to be able to flip a button and change that field. And that field is now changed across the world, where all of the other products out there were, what version are you? And you had to send out CD-ROMs to all of the different locations to get the updates. It's pretty nuts to say the least. Um, let's see. Anybody else? Any other little paradigm changes you want to talk about?
I'll throw in, Scott, the idea of like how we screen people had to evolve as people changed, as the world changed, right? When I started my career, we literally had to ask people if they knew how to use a mouse. And that, because that wasn't a given. And, that is no longer a question I ask in my screeners these days. So just kind of the way that we go out and think about who do we need to get has absolutely evolved in terms of, understanding who they are and what they can do and what their needs are.
So, Michelle, you're saying I should stop asking people if they know how to use a mouse. That might explain why I'm getting so many tough recruits. And I'm reading some of the text here. Like Judy points out, New York Times app moving the caret to the bottom. Mac is coming out with some of the other ones of the browser is going to put the URL at the bottom. I don't know if it's right or wrong, but it's certainly going to be change. And I'm wondering how everybody's going to feel of, it's the proverbial "you move my cheese," and so we'll see how they do. And Lonnie's point about the early systems like the Next and some of those early pieces, like there was a competition for, we want to be in your face. So is it the Next computer, or is it Windows for Microsoft, or HP had a new wave? One of our early research projects, we always had a blooper highlight reel, and one of them happened to be the guy here, Lonnie Shambi, as the person that used command line interfaces all the time, and you ask him to use a graphical window, and they're like, why would I want this? And he picked up the mouse, like, you're expecting me to use this to do my job. It's just going to slow me down because I can do everything as is. And I've unfortunately, I've got Lonnie's video clip burned into my brain because we heard that so many different times. So let's switch subjects a little bit. Let's talk about the differences of research then versus now. And I think one of the recurring themes is, in the grand scheme of things, our industry from today even to 20, 30 years ago, it is the exact same thing, just completely different. Every sales call for Jeff, and by the way, I was at Usability Sciences for 20 something years of my life, all told. And so when we're on these different kickoff calls and sales calls, the fundamental question is, what's the problem that you're trying to solve? And then who are you solving it for? We're going to go talk to them, and then we'll report back. Like that's pretty much it. So I'm curious about the today, now versus then. Michelle, any stories on that timeline, on that topic?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think that there's a lot of kind of known, like, problem spaces that have been quote unquote solved by and large, right? We talked about the shopping cart. Like, that's not as challenging anymore for people to have some of these like patterns that have essentially been worked out and people have gotten used to and are largely usable. We, at least in terms of being a member of a product team, we have kind of a lot of the basic usability worked out and baked into a design system. There's still usability issues to be discovered, but the research is much more around who are the people, right? What are their characteristics? What are their needs? What are the gaps between what we offer and what their needs are? And more fundamental questions, I find, is what we're answering a lot more, and less of the like really fine-grained usability questions. Around specific interaction design. Not that they're not there, they're still there. It's just not the bulk of what we do. Whereas when I started my career, that was 100% of what we did almost, was just figuring out, is this thing usable? So I feel like the industry, especially the design aspects, have really progressed, and there's this body of knowledge that's a little bit more kind of established, and people have gotten used to certain interactions and these new paradigms that we've been discussing. As people have adjusted to those paradigms, it becomes less of a usability question versus a foundational, is this fulfilling your needs kind of question.
Yeah, spot on. Paige, how about you? Any observations then versus now?
Yeah, I mean, I think it was fairly intuitive back then. You had to be curious, but the process was the same. The problems changed, but the process to solve them didn't really. Now we have, design thinking and all of these other frameworks that kind of help us come up with a better plan for how to uncover the problems, as well as to ideate, to use buzzwords, ideate solutions to those problems. But it's the same, but you're right, it's completely different, but it's still us trying to solve problems. We still have to be curious,
Yeah,
is what
perfect.
I'm saying. Still have to stay curious, and it's still kind of hard to sell research, even internally, externally. It's not as hard, mind you, but it is still more of a challenge than it should be.
Yeah, Jeff, I get feedback on your mic, so that's why we keep on clicking the mute button. Sorry about
Really? Okay.
For me at least, yeah, please. What you
Well, I don't know that I am to all the things that have changed over the years. I mean, if somebody just asked me to describe what do we do, I say, well, we bring in people who who should be able to use a product. We sit them down in front of the product. We give them things to do with the product, and we see if they can do it. And I mean, that's fundamentally how I've been describing a process for, at a very high level, obviously, but for many, many years.
Yeah, perfect. To me, like some of the tools that exist now didn't exist then. We talk about moderated versus unmoderated, and obviously moderated has always been around forever, because it's one thing to ask questions, but the art is in pausing and being able to feed a question back based on what they just did 2 seconds ago, 3 minutes ago, if not 15 minutes ago. And the unmoderated, obviously you missed that nuance of being able to ask, we saw you did this, now what about that? But there are so many advantages and disadvantages of both. And so with unmoderated, just being able to get a bunch of sessions done, be able to play back at 1.5 speed, so I can really fast forward through those processes. There are some interesting trade-offs. Something that Michelle had reminded me of is just about card sorting. We used to do this card sorting again for online grocery, and optimal sort didn't exist, and some of these other things didn't exist, and so we had to get really MacGyver clever about how to track this down. And so we did a lot of focus groups in a lot of different countries about how should online grocery stores be categorized. And so we would come up with these little removable labels, stickers that people could put on butcher paper, move them around as needed. They had to be translated to all the different languages. We put barcodes on there so that we could plug them into a spreadsheet. I got really good at Excel to figure out how to basically do what optimal sort does just by magic. We had to make up on spreadsheet to get some level of consistency going here. It's pretty nuts in the grand scheme of things. Any other research then versus now observations?
I'll say that I've noticed in the past, I don't know, I would say maybe less than 10 years, maybe 5 to 7 years, that there's, in terms of the sophistication of the product team members that I work with, like they are much more savvy. So they're asking better questions, and they're engaging in a way that is much more helpful in terms of solving the problems in real time as we're getting feedback from users. So I feel like there's kind of an evolution in terms of the consumers of our work. To Paige's point, there's still those folks who are like, "Ugh, what are you talking about?" But I find that they're fewer and fewer, and that the ones who are, just naturally kind of engaged with the research process, they're just getting more and more sophisticated about how, what they want to get out of it and how to engage with it so that they can get the most out of it.
Yeah, go ahead, Jeff.
Oh, I'm unmuted now. Yeah, one of the comments I was going to make is the change in acceptance of the UX practice. Back in, you talk about the early 90s, late 90s. I mean, we were bringing developers to observe the testing, and they accused us of recruiting idiots to review their software. It is very, very refreshing to see how UX is now accepted. So we don't have to fight that battle anymore. There are a number of other battles we're fighting, but the general acceptance of the UX practice is rewarding. It wasn't that way when we started this years ago.
That is a true statement. And to me, I think of all the different kinds of research methodologies that we've ever done, the recurring one that is the top of the best is where we run sessions on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, and we make changes along the way. And to Jeff's point, like the body language of the developer and designer on Monday, we all have that practice story of user one went through and the observer team's like, that guy's an idiot. And then by user 3 and 5, like their body language is changing. They're going through the levels of denial. Maybe I am the one that has the problem. And then by Wednesday, they're able to start making some changes and adaptation. And it's like, that has always been the secret sauce, is to get people to listen and like, let's adapt and let's test it over time. To me, my ironic frustration is somebody came out with a book. It's like lean sprints and startups and the right testing, RITE. Like, I remember going, what is the right methodology? And he's like, well, that's the rapid iterative, blah, blah, blah. And like, wait, they're getting credit because they just put a PDF of something that Jeff started in 1988. Like, go sit down, Junior.
Well,
Michael Medlock.
Yeah, and to just add to that, Scott, when you're doing a Monday, Wednesday, Friday, it is fantastic for the designers to see something fail on Monday and then be spectacularly successful on Wednesday. And once that happens, you got them, right? Yeah. They are there and with you forever, right?
Yeah. And it's also interesting, just the things that have evolved for the better, but also there are some elements that sort of had negative steps. And I would use online surveys as an example. SurveyMonkey has a lot of research templates that are out there. Usability Sciences had a product called WebIQ, and Michelle, I don't know if you remember anything about WebIQ, he says rhetorically. What do you remember about WebIQ of intercepting folks versus what's available today?
I will tell you, I miss WebIQ. It was, so just in case anyone listening doesn't know, what we did was, and I say we, like when I joined Usability Sciences, they were already doing it, but I ran a number of these studies. We would intercept people as they came to a site or to a part of a site and say, hey, what did you come here to do? And then we'd say at the end, when they were leaving, we'd ask, were you able to do what you came here to do? And in between all of that, we had their web analytics. We knew what pages they went to and what things they clicked on. And being able to kind of marry that, like, what was your intent? Do you consider yourself successful at that intent you told us you were doing? And what path took you from here to there? Whether you were successful or not, understanding that path was really useful. And we really don't have that. And there's no tool that replicates that today. We can intercept people and we can ask them things as they come in and we can ask them things as they leave. But there's no tool that like easily makes it possible to marry those responses to their actual path. It is super painful. There's a number of different tools we have today that kind of mimic it, kind of get you there. There's tools that have session replay, which has its place. Watching the session replays are useful. But it's not the same. It's not the same as having that intent and success and the marriage of that data with their actual path through the site. I mean, that was just magic to me, and I miss it.
Yeah, take our time there.
Yes, and I think to me one of the coolest insights, and a guy named Roger Bynum is a leader of Usability Sciences around the surveys at that time, and hear me now, of all the things that you're going to learn on this call, asking survey questions about 1 through 7, how satisfied are you versus how successful were you, are two very different answers. And Roger's point on that one is like, when you look at the chart of satisfaction, it's sort of this lumpy bell curve towards a 5, like everybody sort of leans over there, and there's nothing really actionable about why were you unsatisfied. But if you ask about success, it's generally pretty polarizing. Either I was successful or unsuccessful. And if you do a follow-up survey question of, sorry, you were unsuccessful, why? There is so much of a gold mine to really get into that. So I'm still amazed that our industry has not caught up on don't ask satisfaction, ask about intent plus success. Those two questions go together. Jeff, any other thoughts on that one? Like that was.
Well, I think if the three of you could go to your executives and get me a pot full of money, I'll reach out to Russ and see if we can't resurrect WebIQ.
Bring back Test Logger too.
Silence.
No. Yeah, exactly. Thank you, Jaime. There's a point in here, Jaime's point about Test Logger, like Usability Science has always created software ahead of its time. And I never thought I would be able to type in this world until we created this product called Test Logger. And that is our closed caption. Everything that the user says, we're typing somewhere in the back room using this product called Test Logger for getting that done. Thank you.
Still, I'd be willing to pay out of my pocket if someone could like convert that into something that I could have.
But, and all jokes aside, to Michelle's point, like if you could marry the intent plus satisfaction plus where did you go, there is a lot of possibilities with the company that could do that. So let's go. I'm going to look at the chat window. If anybody has questions, thoughts, please add them in here. Certainly any questions we're happy to field. Otherwise, we're going to sort of switch over to, or while questions come in, if any, I want to sort of talk about how do we learn research now versus then? My favorite story on this topic, what I learned from Jeff Schuler, the art of sale, is whenever a customer calls and they have something in mind, sell it to them. It's pretty crazy, but this is my Jeff Schuler 101. And we had a call back. Imagine a time where Google did not exist. Thank you, Paige, for listening. Imagine a time where there was no Wikipedia and a customer called up Jeff Schuler one day and they said, we want to do this thing. Do you offer heuristics? And I'm sitting next to Jeff and Jeff goes, hits mute. He says, what is heuristics? But he didn't say what is heuristics. There were some other descriptors. He hits unmute and says, of course we do.
Research, right?
Nobody in the room knew what a heuristics was at the time, because it is a stupid word in the grand scheme of things. Of an industry that tries to be easy to use, heuristics, what does that word mean? There was no way to figure that one out. But again, Jeff Schuler 101, don't get in the way of whatever they're asking for, because my job title at Usability Sciences at one point was the Chief Revenue Prevention Officer, because the customers would say, we need 20 sessions. Like, oh no, you could probably just do 4. Like, rah, Chief Revenue Prevention Officer. That's my show.
There you go.
I
Any
still
other-
say
Go ahead, Paige.
don't confuse selling with installing. I use that all the time. It's true.
There you go.
It's because, by the way, we haven't said this yet. While at Usability Sciences, there was a thing called a quote book. And today in Facebook and Twitter world, whenever you hear something funny, you can type it down. It's like, I can't believe that person said that. That was our equivalent back a long time ago of these different quotes. And so there are a lot of different Jeff Schulerisms of how to run a business. I think all three, Paige and Michelle and I, basically got an MBA of how to run a business because of Jeff Schuler and all these different sayings that we would keep track of forever in the quote book.
It sounded it sounded hard. That's why I never did it. That's why I never started a business.
Yeah, no kidding. Michelle, any thoughts from you about learning research now versus then?
Oh my goodness. It's like night and day, honestly. In my spare time, I teach at the University of Texas in Austin. I live here outside of Austin. And I teach at the School of Information, where they have for years had a master's and you could specialize in user experience. So you could get a graduate degree in user experience. And just now in the fall, they're starting a bachelor's program. So you can now get a bachelor's degree in user experience in the School of Information here at EUT. And we're by far not the only ones. There's plenty of actual formal programs these days, not to mention all of the, quote unquote boot camps that'll get you started anyway. It's not the same as boots on the ground, on the job training, but it's there's definitely way more kind of formalized education available these days.
Yeah, University of Texas has the Center of Retail Excellence, I believe it is. And we've got several folks that have joined us from UNT because they touch on UX research, the importance in the retail environment, et cetera, et cetera. It's good program.
Yeah, and you'll see UX related classes in all different kinds of departments. School of Information is just one example of a kind of program, but design schools offer it now, and business schools offer at least classes that are related to UX or are in UX and design thinking. There's just so many places in which people are exposed to it now.
Agree. And it, to me, that the continual, every summer we get new interns coming in, and the interns are coming in with a master's program, and just what they just know already. It took us 10 years to figure out what that is. And that part's amazing. Arguably one of my few claims to fame in this world is that I've sat down and done at least 10,000 hours of one-on-one, what are you thinking conversations. And I think that list is getting smaller and smaller of people that can say that, because now there's so many different research tools, so many different ways of doing it. And Usability Sciences is really a pretty unique offering of, we are going to actually sit down and talk to your customers. We're going to have a really good in-depth conversation that I think sort of gets missed in the nuance. So I don't know. Nobody's going to know how many hours Jeff Schuler has done of sitting down and asking people, what are you thinking? I'm going to guess it's over 200 hours, but it's pretty crazy when you think about.
What do you think?
Just a little bit.
I see that Bobby's called out HBI and human factors in engineering psychology. And yeah, absolutely. Those in the class I teach about the kind of the history of the profession. And absolutely, those are, some of the academic disciplines that have contributed to the development. Cognitive science as well. So my own background was also contributed the word heuristic probably because that is definitely definitely a concept that we talked about in cognitive science. And even behavioral scientists, behavioral economics, economists, we hire those folks now. We hire people from a variety of backgrounds, educational backgrounds, and experience, and it's just such a multidisciplinary. The foundations of the profession has a multidisciplinary history. Oh, fellow neuroscientist. Welcome.
Nerd. Just kidding. And I alluded to this before, but like when Michelle joined Usability Sciences, it really was like having a Wikipedia person walk in. For example, a client called and said, "Can you do a chi-squared analysis?" And Jeff naturally said, "Yes." And then later on, we'll figure out what a chi-squared analysis. But Michelle was our Wikipedia at the time. I was like, Michelle, you probably don't know this off the top of your head, but what's a chi-squared analysis? Expecting to have her to have to go find a book, but no, Michelle would just go right into a professor mode and explaining things, dumbing them down so that even I could understand it. And that was a huge part of the world then versus now. We have so many different conferences. Nielsen Norman Group, NN Group does really good series of workshops. There's Chris Nodder. There's different online tools where you can learn what's a Fitts law and all these different pieces. And I hope Michelle is proud of me for even saying Fitts law. So
warms my heart.
Exactly. And so I'm looking at Avni's question. Do you think educational background matters nowadays as much as someone in regards? And I'll give you my take on this. When I'm interviewing, generally I'm listening for three loose things, like just aptitude. Thanks, Paige. Pay attention. Aptitude is how quickly can you just pick up various things and context switching and all those different pieces. You've got to be able to juggle and multitask. The other one is storytelling. Like you have to be able to listen. You have to be able to tell back, here's what we heard, and influence change. And then third, and it's important, but not as important as the other two, is the methods, knowing when should I use this versus that approach. That they're all important, but if you don't have aptitude and you don't have storytelling, the rest is for naught, is how I would look at that. Paige, any thoughts on that one?
No, you're good. And just, it's the curiosity. I mean, like I said, when Jeff interviewed me, granted, I was pretty early in the days of Usability Sciences, but I got the impression that it was just like, it felt like it was going to be a good fit. Like you just, when you know, right? And I think that that's what I look for when I'm hiring people. Yeah, there are some requirements based on your company rules and everything, but I would love to hire for fit. And maybe it's just because I was, I got started and I didn't have a background in it, so I have a soft spot in my heart for people who have a passion for UX. But I mean, I think it's challenging. I love those three though. Aptitude is very important. It's more important than you think, right? You have to be able to understand.
Yeah.
Michelle,
My answer to that, Scott, would be that the educational background helps, certainly helps, but it's the aptitude, it's the flexibility, the ability to react to what you're seeing in research sessions is the most important thing, right?
I'll throw in there too that I think the ability to empathize is something that is super important. One of the best user researchers I've ever worked for was a theater major, and he had this like amazing ability to put himself in somebody else's shoes in a way that I'd never seen Yes, exactly, Paige. And it was amazing. And I feel like there's skills that come from every background. And again, it's not necessarily about a specific educational background. It wasn't then. It's maybe a little bit more now because there are formal programs. And so there may be hiring managers out there who are, specifically looking for X degree or X type of degree. But there's a bunch of folks like the four of us who are pretty much, the grizzled old vets who are like, well, nobody had a degree in it before. So, a good user researcher can come from all variety of backgrounds.
Yeah, absolutely agree. Even music majors.
Even music majors. And I think the quality of the many things that, I look at Paige and Michelle, like all three of us benefited from Jeff Schuler so much. But the one that Jeff is I think the best at is in the worst storm with the winds going this way and this way. The keel is just always keep the boat going this way without having too much sway. And so being able to work through the anxieties, like what's the problem? Like let's stay focused on where are we headed? And that is true for all researchers. You just can't get wound up in the drama. I'm looking at the clock here, and Christos is keeping us honest. So we got about 2 minutes left. Any other last minute questions from folks?
I'll answer Bobby's question about different perspectives. It like 100%, absolutely. Different perspectives are absolutely helpful.
Yeah, and to Lee Wynn's point here, there was a time where I ran a session with a therapist, and it was, "How are you feeling?" "No, how are you feeling?" Like,
How did that make you feel?
I'll tell one more
Seen a lot of
story
stuff.
too about a characteristic that I think user researchers need, which is the ability to kind of roll with the punches and improvise. My second week at Usability Sciences, Jeff walks into the office where my desk was and says, "I need your help in the lab." And I'm like, "Okay, sure." New employee, all eager. "What do you need, Jeff?" And he hands me a piece of paper and he says, "I need you to run this study. The client will be here in half an hour." And I'm like, "Okay, great." I can do that.
All I got, Michelle, was, "Hey, we're out of coffee. Run to Sam's." Like,
Well, my favorite thing that was Paige and I, her 3 weeks in, we're out of town, and I ended up not feeling well, and so Paige had to try to moderate a session where I had to walk out because I was not doing very good, and I just remember Paige going, where are you going? And to Bobby's point, improv, the being able to say yes and is such a huge piece in our piece. And I did a workshop or joined a workshop like 6 months ago, and ever since that point, in every meeting I'm in, I've just found myself emphasizing yes and quite a bit. So I'm looking at the clock. I think we're gonna start wrapping up here. Thank you all for joining us here, and thank you, Jeff Schuler and Sharon Johnson and everybody else at Usability Sciences for helping us get to where we are in this world.
And we thank you guys for all the contributions you made. I mean, it's been great and very rewarding to see the success of so many USC alumni.
Thank you, guys. Thanks for inviting me. This was fun.
yeah, it was